Somewhere in your city, right now, a truck is pulling into a plain, unmarked warehouse. Inside are pallets stacked with cartons of cigarettes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is the business almost nobody talks about: wholesale cigarette distribution, the middleman operation that moves product from massive tobacco manufacturers into every gas station, smoke shop, and convenience store you've ever walked into. It sounds like it should be wildly profitable. Cigarettes are one of the most addictive consumer products on earth. Prices keep rising every year, and demand has stayed remarkably steady for over a century. So today, we're breaking down the real economics of owning a cigarette distribution business, and the numbers are stranger and thinner than almost anyone expects. Let's start with what it actually takes to get into this business, because it is nothing like opening a regular wholesale company. The very first thing you need isn't a warehouse or a truck, it's a license. And this is where things get complicated fast. Every state requires a wholesale cigarette dealer license, and depending on where you operate, this can range from a simple, low-cost registration to a serious regulatory hurdle. In New York City alone, a wholesale cigarette dealer permit costs around $1,500, but the price tag is the easy part. Some states require you to maintain a completely separate, dedicated warehouse just for receiving and distributing cigarettes, physically apart from any other product line you might sell. On top of that, some jurisdictions require new wholesalers to secure commitments from at least 2 different cigarette manufacturers whose combined market share hits a minimum threshold, sometimes as high as 40% of the entire state market, before you're even allowed to operate. In other words, you can't just decide to become a cigarette wholesaler tomorrow. You need existing relationships with major manufacturers before regulators will let you touch a single carton. Once you clear licensing, the next reality check is capital. And this is where cigarette distribution behaves completely differently from almost any other wholesale business. Because of how tobacco tax works, distributors typically have to pay the excise tax up front before the product is ever sold to a retailer. In most states, this means physically purchasing tax stamps and affixing one to every single pack of cigarettes before it leaves your warehouse, proving to the government that the tax has already been paid. Picture a roll of 30,000 stamps. Distributors don't get that for free. They buy it, and then it's their job to stick every single stamp on every single pack by hand or by machine before it can legally be sold. This means your working capital isn't just tied up in the wholesale cost of the cigarettes themselves, it's also tied up in taxes you've already paid to the government weeks or months before you've collected a dollar from any retailer. If you're moving large volumes, that tax float alone can require hundreds of thousands of dollars in available cash just to keep inventory flowing. Now, here's a small silver lining most people don't know about. Because stamping every single pack is labor-intensive, some states actually give distributors a purchase discount as compensation for doing this work on the government's behalf. It's usually less than 1% of the stamp's value, capped at a small maximum per roll. It's not much, but it's one of the few places in this business where the numbers tilt slightly in the distributor's favor instead of squeezing them further. So let's talk about where the actual money goes once a pack of cigarettes moves through the chain, because this is the part that surprises almost everyone. In most high-tax markets, taxes alone, meaning excise tax plus sales tax combined, can eat up somewhere between 50 and 90% of the retail price of a pack. That's not revenue for anyone in the supply chain. It goes straight to the government. Of what's left, the manufacturer usually keeps the largest single slice, often somewhere between 10 and 30% of the retail price, since they control the brand, the recipe, and the marketing. The wholesaler or distributor, the business we're actually talking about today, typically earns a markup of only about 2 to 8% of the retail price, and in many states, the real-world average wholesale markup sits under 4%. 2 of the largest cigarette distributors in the country have publicly reported markups below 2%. Read that again. Some of the biggest players in this entire industry are working on margins smaller than what you'd expect a corner grocery store to make on a loaf of bread. So how does anyone make real money running a business with margins that thin? The answer is volume. And a lot of it. This is fundamentally a business of moving enormous quantities of product through a supply chain efficiently, not a business of making a big profit on any single sale. Distributors succeed by handling massive daily volume. keeping logistics tight, minimizing waste and spoilage, which is easy since cigarettes don't expire the way food does, and maintaining efficient relationships with dozens or hundreds of retail accounts at once. A distributor moving millions of packs a month can still generate meaningful total profit, even at a 2 to 4% markup, purely because of scale. This is a logistics business wearing a tobacco costume. Success depends far more on operational efficiency, route planning, and account retention than on the product itself. There's also a revenue stream in this business that almost nobody outside the industry knows about: manufacturer incentive programs. Major tobacco companies run what are sometimes called scan data programs, where distributors and retailers share detailed sales data back to the manufacturer, tracking exactly what's selling, where, and how fast. In exchange, manufacturers pay rebates back to the distributor, essentially paying them for information and for pushing their specific brands over competitors. For some distributors, these rebate programs can meaningfully boost total profit beyond what the razor-thin product markup alone would generate. It's one of the quiet ways this industry keeps itself profitable, despite margins that would sink most other wholesale businesses. Now, let's talk about risk, because this industry carries a unique set of them that most business owners never have to think about. The first is regulatory risk, and it's constant. Tax rates change, sometimes significantly, and every increase ripples through the entire supply chain. Distributors often have to absorb short-term cash flow disruptions when a new tax rate takes effect, since existing stamped inventory purchased at the old tax rate now needs to be reconciled against a new one. Second is the slow, steady decline in cigarette smoking rates across most developed countries, driven by health awareness, higher prices, and shifting consumer habits. Smoking rates have been falling for decades, which means the overall size of the market you're distributing into is shrinking, not growing year over year. But here's the twist. This decline hasn't killed the wholesale tobacco distribution business. It's just changed the product mix flowing through the same trucks and the same warehouses. Alternative nicotine products, vapes, nicotine pouches, and other smokeless options have surged, and the profit margins on these products are dramatically higher than traditional cigarettes. Industry data shows gross margins on alternative nicotine products can run more than double the margin on a standard pack of cigarettes. Smart distributors have leaned hard into this shift, since these products also come with real operational advantages. They have a much longer shelf life than cigarettes, they take up far less warehouse space per unit sold, and they carry a cleaner, more modern image that appeals to a different generation of retailers and customers. In many ways, the future of this business isn't cigarettes at all. It's the entire category of nicotine products, with traditional cigarettes slowly becoming just one line item among several on the delivery truck. There's one more risk worth mentioning: the illicit market. Because tobacco taxes are so high, cigarette smuggling and counterfeit product remain a persistent, serious problem in this industry. Legitimate distributors have to compete not just with each other, but with an entire black market moving untaxed product, and regulators watch licensed distributors extremely closely as a result, with strict record-keeping requirements, regular audits, and steep penalties for any violation. This is not a business where you can operate loosely or cut corners on paperwork. Every sale, every stamp, and every shipment typically needs to be documented and traceable. So, is owning a cigarette wholesale distribution business a good investment? The honest answer is, it can be a stable, cash-generating business, but it is absolutely not the high-margin gold mine most people assume it to be. Success here doesn't come from clever pricing or a beloved brand. It comes from operational discipline, strong manufacturer relationships, tight logistics, smart use of rebate programs, and increasingly, a willingness to diversify beyond cigarettes into the broader nicotine category. It's a business built on thin margins and heavy volume, propped up by strict regulation on one side and shifting consumer habits on the other, which makes it one of the more quietly complex operations hiding behind an everyday product most people never think twice about. If you found this breakdown useful, let me know in the comments which business you want us to break down next.